A woman with $1 million fortune and a target on her back. A man with nothing but a child and a shotgun. When Eliza Fairchild, a New York widow fleeing a dark secret, collapses in the Wyoming wilderness, she's not just off the trail. She's running for her life. She whispers she's lost. But when single father Jonah Wells finds her beside her wrecked carriage, his gruff reply changes everything. Then follow me home. This isn't a story of rescue. It's a story of survival, a desperate siege, and a love forged in gunpowder and dust. Stick with us, because the twist in this story will leave you breathless. The Wyoming sky was a judgment. It was too big, too blue, and offered no shade. Eliza Fairchild lay pressed against the hot, abrasive sandstone, the silk of her ruined traveling dress catching on every snag. The air smelled of dust, sage, and the metallic, coppery tang of fresh blood. 40 yards away, her carriage, a custom-built Pullman meant for a civilized journey to San Francisco, was a heap of splintered wood and twisted metal, one wheel spinning lazily in the silence. Her driver, a man named Peters, was dead. Her private guard, Mr. Halloway, was also dead, his hand still frozen on the grip of his holstered Colt. They hadn't been bandits. Bandits would have been loud, sloppy. This was quiet, precise, and terrifying. The ambushers hadn't even tried to rob her. They had simply run the carriage off the trail and when it crashed, shot the men who were paid to protect her. They were looking for her. Eliza clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. She had one small, pearl-handled derringer in her valise, a laughable toy against the rifles that had torn her world apart. She was a ghost in fine clothes, a creature of New York drawing rooms now bleeding into the dirt. She'd been hiding for hours, the sun crawling across the sky, baking her alive. She was rich, educated, and utterly, profoundly useless. This is where I die, she thought, the realization settling not with panic, but with a cold, hollow dread. Then she heard it. Not the crunch of boots she'd been dreading, but the rhythmic, soft tread of a single horse. She froze. One of them, coming back to finish the job? A man on a tall bay horse appeared on the ridge. He wasn't one of the ambushers. They had been dressed in rough, practical gear. This man looked part of the land itself. He wore worn denim, a faded flannel shirt, and a hat beaten into submission by years of sun and rain. A Winchester rifle was slotted in a saddle scabbard, and a belt of cartridges rested on his hip. He looked hard, not cruel, but carved from the same unforgiving material as the rocks around them. He reined in his horse, his eyes scanning the wreckage with a slow, calculating gaze. He saw the bodies, the tracks, the scattered trunks. He dismounted, his rifle now held loosely in his hand, and moved toward the carriage. Eliza knew she had one choice. He was armed, but he was alone. The others had been a party of 4. She emerged from the rocks, her small valise clutched to her chest. She didn't try to run. She just stood there, shaking, her black mourning veil torn and pinned to her auburn hair. The man snapped the rifle up, his voice a low growl. "Hold right there." Eliza stopped, raising her empty hands. "Please don't." Jonah Wells stared. He'd been checking his southern trap lines, expecting to find a coyote or maybe a fox. He found this. A woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a painting in the lobby of the Cheyenne Bank. She was covered in dust and tears, her fine spun dress a mockery in this landscape. "Who did this?" he asked. His eyes weren't on her. They were on the rocks around them, scanning for movement. I don't know," she whispered. The lie was thin, but it was all she had. "Bandits. They came so fast." Jonah grunted. He knew bandit work. This wasn't it. The trunks, full of expensive clothes, hadn't even been broken into. He knelt by Holloway's body, glanced at the entry wound. This was professional. He looked back at her. Her eyes were wide with a terror that went deeper than the crash. She was a secret walking. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "San Francisco." "This ain't the trail to San Francisco. Not by a long shot. You're miles off." A fresh tear cut a clean path through the grime on her cheek. She'd paid the driver extra to take a private, unmarked route, hoping to avoid notice. So much for that. "Ma'am," Jonah said, his voice softening just a fraction. He was wasting daylight, and this scene was drawing flies. "Are you lost?" Eliza looked at the vast, empty horizon. She thought of the men hunting her, of the New York fortune that was a curse, of the dead husband she hadn't loved, and the brutal brother-in-law she feared. She was an island of money in an ocean of violence. She finally met his gaze. Her voice was a dry rasp. I think I'm lost." Jonah Wells let out a long breath. He'd lost his wife, Hannah, 2 years ago to cholera. He had a 6-year-old daughter at home who needed him. He knew trouble when he saw it, and this woman was a thunderstorm of it. He should have turned his horse, ridden to Red Creek, and told Sheriff Brody. That was the smart thing. But the sun was dipping low, and the coyotes would be out soon. And then there was the look in her eyes. It was the same look he'd seen in a doe caught in one of his snares. He slung the rifle back into its scabbard and walked his horse over to her. He didn't offer to help her up, just stood by the stirrup. "My girl Sarah is waiting on supper," he said, his voice flat. "My ranch is just over that rise. It ain't what you're used to, but it's safe." She just stared at him, unmoving. "Well," he pressed, "you can stay here and wait for whoever did this to come back, or you can come with me." He saw the decision flicker across her face. He was just another danger, but he was the only one offering sanctuary. I can't ride," she stammered, gesturing to her dress. "You'll have to ride astride. I'll take the valise." He offered his hand. It was rough, calloused, and strong. She placed her trembling gloved hand in his. He hauled her up behind his saddle with an easy strength that surprised her. She settled awkwardly, forced to wrap her arms around his waist. She could feel the hard muscle of his back, smell the faint scent of leather, sweat and wood smoke. It was the most real thing she had felt in months. He clicked his tongue, and the bay horse started walking. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice carried back by the wind. "Eliza. Eliza Fairchild." "Jonah Wells," he replied. He looked back one last time at the 2 dead men and the opulent, shattered carriage. "You're a long way from home, Mrs. Fairchild." She pressed her face against his back, hiding from the wind. "I don't have a home." Jonah didn't reply. He just urged the horse forward, toward the small plume of smoke rising from the chimney in the distance. He'd just invited a ghost to his table, and he knew, with the certainty of a man who understands the wilderness, that the wolves who hunted her were not far behind. Jonah's home was not a ranch in the way Eliza Fairchild understood the word. There was no grand white house, no sprawling veranda. It was a cabin. It was a small, sturdy box of hand-hewn logs, chinked with mud and purpose, sitting defiant in a dip of the plains. A single, large cottonwood tree, a rarity, gave it some shade. Nearby stood a modest barn and a corral, holding 2 other horses and a milk cow. It was a pocket of sparse life in an ocean of emptiness. As they rode up, the cabin door swung open, and a small girl in a faded calico dress ran out, stopping short when she saw Eliza. Jonah swung down and immediately went to the girl, scooping her up. "Hey, Pumpkin, I'm late. Got held up." The child, who Eliza guessed was 5 or 6, had Jonah's serious eyes and a tangle of brown hair. She stared at Eliza with undisguised suspicion. "Who's that, Papa?" "This is Mrs. Fairchild. Her carriage broke down. She'll be staying a bit." "Eliza, this is my daughter, Sarah." Jonah helped Eliza slide off the horse. Her legs, unaccustomed to riding, nearly buckled. She smoothed her ruined dress, acutely aware of how she must look, a creature of obscene wealth and profound incompetence. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Sarah," Eliza said, attempting a smile. Sarah just hid her face in Jonah's neck. "She's shy of strangers," Jonah said, setting her down. "Go on inside, Sarah. Keep the stew warm." The girl scampered back inside, leaving the 2 adults on the porch. The silence was heavy. "It's lovely," Eliza said, lying badly. Jonah's gaze was sharp. "Don't, it's not lovely. It's 4 walls and a roof. It's what I built. Come inside." The inside was one large room, dominated by a stone fireplace where a cast-iron pot bubbled. A rough-sawn table with 2 chairs and a bench stood in the center. In one corner was Jonah's cot. In the other, separated by a hanging quilt, was a small rope bed for Sarah. The entire space was smaller than Eliza's New York dressing room, but it was immaculate. The floor was swept, the blankets folded. It smelled of wood smoke, soap, and simmering beef. "Sarah," Jonah said, "fetch the extra plate." Supper was a tense, quiet affair. The stew was thick with potatoes and carrots, and Jonah served it with heavy, dark bread. It was the best meal Eliza had had in weeks, but she could barely swallow. She was an intruder. "You eat like a bird," Jonah observed, not unkindly. "It's very good. Thank you." Sarah just watched Eliza's hands, specifically the large diamond ring on her left hand. It was her wedding band, a cold, heavy stone from her dead husband, Marcus. After the simple meal, Jonah washed the 3 plates in a basin. "You can take my cot," he said, gesturing to the corner. "I'll sleep in the barn." "No, I couldn't possibly—" "I'm not asking, ma'am. You're a guest, and you're in shock. Sarah, get Mrs. Fairchild a clean nightgown. One of Mama's." The child's head snapped up. "Papa, no!" Jonah's voice was firm. "Sarah, now!" The girl's face crumpled, but she obeyed. She went to a small wooden chest at the foot of her bed and pulled out a simple, high-necked cotton nightgown. It was worn soft, but clean and mended. She shoved it at Eliza, her eyes flashing with resentment. "Thank you," Eliza whispered. Jonah took a lantern. "Bolt the door behind me. There's a bar. Use it." He left, and Eliza was alone with the hostile child. The silence in the cabin was thick. I'm sorry about your mother," Eliza said softly, not knowing what else to say. Sarah, who was getting ready for bed, turned. "She's dead. Cholera. Papa says she's an angel now." "I'm sure she is," Eliza said. "Are you an angel?" Sarah asked, her voice small. Eliza was taken aback. No, dear. I'm just a woman. You look like one. From Papa's book. The pretty ones with the nice dresses." Sarah pointed to a shelf where a single, thick Bible sat. "Papa says angels protect people. Is that why those men were dead?" Eliza's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "Papa said he found you by a wreck. He said they were bad men. Did you make them dead?" "No, child, of course not. They tried to hurt me." Sarah climbed into a small bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin. "Papa will hurt them if they come here. He's the strongest man in the valley." She turned her back, a clear dismissal. Eliza changed behind the hanging quilt, the rough cotton of Hannah Wells's nightgown scraping against her skin, which was used to find silk. She folded her torn dress, a $500 Parisian design, and laid it on the floor. She slid onto Jonah's cot, which smelled faintly of him, leather and clean sweat. She lay awake for hours, listening to the alien sounds of the frontier. The wind whistling around the eaves, the distant call of a wolf, the soft rustle of the horses in the barn. She was in a dead woman's nightgown, in a stranger's bed, being protected by a man who didn't trust her, and hated by a child who missed her mother. She clutched the valise to her chest. Inside, beneath her jewels and a small stack of money, was the one thing that had gotten her into this mess, her late husband's private ledger. The real reason her brother-in-law, Silas Fairchild, wanted her dead. She had told Jonah bandits, but bandits were not Silas. Bandits gave up. Silas never would. I've brought my death to his door, she realized. She listened to the sound of Jonah moving in the barn, a soft thump, a cough. He was out there, in the cold, while she took his bed. For the first time since her husband's funeral, Eliza Fairchild began to cry. Not for her lost fortune, or her comfort, or even her life. She wept for the simple, devastating kindness of a stranger, and the terrible price he and his daughter might have to pay for it. Jonah Wells did not sleep in the barn. He sat in the hayloft, his Winchester across his knees, watching the trail that led to his ranch. He'd seen the tracks around the carriage. 4, maybe 5 riders. They were professionals. They wouldn't just leave a high-value target to chance. They'd be looking for her. The woman, Eliza, was a lie. He could smell it on her. Not a malicious lie, but a terrified one. She dressed like she owned a bank, but she was as spooked as a rabbit. Bandits. No. This was a hunt. When the sun finally crested the mountains, he went back to the cabin. He didn't knock, just entered. Eliza was already up, sitting on the edge of the cot, her hands clasped. She had tried to tidy her hair. She looked pale and exhausted, but less hysterical. Sarah was still asleep. "I'm riding to Red Creek," he said, his voice low. "Need supplies, and I need to see what I can hear." "Red Creek?" "The town. It's half a day's ride. You'll be safe here. Don't leave the cabin. Don't light the stove. Don't open the door. Not for anyone. Sarah knows the rules." "Please," she said, standing up. "Don't tell anyone I'm here. The bandits. They might have friends." He just stared at her. "I know how to keep my mouth shut, Mrs. Fairchild. But you should know. This valley is small. Secrets don't stay secret for long." He grabbed a sack and began filling it with a few empty jars. "While I'm gone, you can make yourself useful. The water bucket needs filling from the well, and there's a patch of mending in that basket. If you know how to use a needle." He left before she could answer. It was a test. Eliza watched him ride off, his back straight, the rifle in its scabbard. She was alone with the child. She found the mending basket. It was full of Sarah's socks, all with holes in the toes, and one of Jonah's shirts, missing 2 buttons. Eliza, who had been taught needlepoint as a girl, sat down. Her hands, soft and manicured, fumbled with the coarse thread. It was clumsy work, but after an hour, the socks were darned and the buttons were sewed on. When Sarah woke up, she padded over and saw the pile of mended clothes. She looked at Eliza, her expression unreadable. I fixed your socks," Eliza said. Sarah picked one up and examined the stitching. "It's messy. Mama's was straighter." "Yes, well," Eliza said, her cheeks coloring. "She had more practice, I imagine." A small smile touched the corner of Sarah's mouth. "Are you a princess?" "No, dear. I was a wife." "Are you going to marry Papa?" Eliza choked on her own breath. "Oh, goodness, no, I'm just passing through. I'll be gone as soon as I can." Sarah's face darkened. Everyone leaves. She grabbed a piece of the bread from last night and ran outside to the porch. Eliza followed her. "Sarah, I didn't mean—" "It's fine," the girl mumbled, not looking at her. "Papa's all I need." Eliza sat on the porch step. The air was clean, not like the cold-choked air of New York. The silence was vast. "He's a good man, your papa." "He's the best," Sarah agreed, loyal. "He can shoot a hawk from the sky, and he can build anything. He built this house. And the barn. After Mama. After. We used to live in a smaller one, but he built this." A man who could build a home with his own hands. Her late husband, Marcus, had been 65 when she married him. His hands had been soft, paper dry, and had never held anything heavier than a stock certificate. Red Creek wasn't much of a town. It was one dusty main street with a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and the sheriff's office. Jonah tied his horse outside the store. He wasn't there for supplies, not really. He was there for the saloon. The rusty spur was dim, even at midday. It smelled of stale beer and desperation. There were a few local ranchers at a table, but Jonah's eyes went right to the bar. 2 men stood there. They were not from around here. They wore dark, clean dusters, bowler hats, and their sidearms were new, well-oiled Colts. City men, Pinkertons or worse. Jonah nodded to the bartender, ordered a beer he didn't want, and leaned against a post, listening. "Told you, Mr. Thorne," one of the men was saying. "Our employer is very specific. A runaway. Left New York in a hurry. We have a wire confirming she bought a private carriage in Omaha." "And you're sure she came through here?" the bartender asked. "Her route was supposed to pass north of here. But there's word of a wreck up on the high trail. We're riding out to check it now." Jonah's blood turned to ice. As the men paid and turned to leave, one of them bumped into another man who was just entering. This man, Jonah knew all too well. "Watch it, city boy," the man snarled. It was Dutch Hogan, a local land grabber, a brute who'd tried to divert the creek from Jonah's property 2 years prior. Hogan was the kind of man who'd burn a field for spite. The man in the duster, Mr. Thorne, looked Hogan up and down. "Apologies. We're looking for a wreck. A carriage." Hogan's eyes lit up with greedy interest. "A wreck, you say? Rich folks?" "A woman," the second agent said. "Black hair, fine clothes. Answers to Eliza Fairchild. There's a significant reward for her safe return." Hogan smiled, a nasty expression. "Fairchild, I'll keep an eye out. I know these hills better than anyone." The agents left. Hogan watched them go, then looked around the saloon. His eyes met Jonah's. Jonah, his face a mask of stone, finished his beer and left. He walked to the general store, his mind racing. He bought coffee, flour, and 3 boxes of .44 caliber cartridges. The store owner, Pete, bagged them. "Stocking up for winter, Jonah, or expecting trouble?" "Just like to be prepared, Pete," Jonah said. He rode out of Red Creek, not toward his ranch, but in a wide circle, cutting back through the arroyos. He needed to see if he was being followed. The city men were a problem, but Dutch Hogan was a catastrophe. Hogan knew Jonah had found the wreck. The tracks of his single horse would be all over the site. Hogan was greedy, smart, and had no conscience. He'd put 2 and 2 together in a heartbeat. He wasn't just bringing supplies home, he was bringing a war. He spurred his horse, kicking up a cloud of alkali dust. He had to get to Eliza and Sarah. He had to know the truth, and he had to know it now. He rode the bay horse hard, taking a treacherous shortcut through the rocky canyons that he usually avoided. The sun was a hot weight on his shoulders, but a cold dread was settling in his gut. Dutch Hogan. Of all the men in Wyoming Territory, it had to be him. When his cabin came into view, he felt a sliver of relief. There was no sign of riders. just a small figure on the porch. He dismounted before the horse even stopped, his face a thundercloud. Eliza stood up from the porch step, a look of alarm on her face. "Jonah, what's wrong? Get inside," he barked. He grabbed the rifle and the saddlebags of ammo. Sarah ran to him. "Papa, did you bring me a peppermint?" "Not now, Sarah. Go to your room. Stay there." His tone was so harsh the girl's eyes welled up. She fled behind the quilt divider. Eliza followed him in, wringing her hands. "Jonah, you're frightening me." He slammed the door and dropped the bar in place. Then he turned on her. "You lied to me," he said, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. "From the second I found you." I don't know what you mean." "Stop!" he roared. He threw the boxes of cartridges on the table. "I was in Red Creek, at the Rusty Spur. 2 men, agents, asking about a runaway, asking about Eliza Fairchild." Her face went white, all the blood drained from it. "They're not the worst part," Jonah pressed on, advancing on her. "They're talking to a man named Dutch Hogan, a local snake who'd sell his own mother for $1. He knows I use that trail. He's going to know I found you, and he's going to come here, to my home." He was inches from her now. She could feel the anger rolling off him. "You didn't just stumble into trouble, Mrs. Fairchild. You are the trouble. You brought a hunt to my door. To my daughter's door." Eliza backed up until she hit the cold stone of the fireplace. She was trapped. "You don't understand." "Then make me understand," he yelled. "Right now, the whole truth, or I'll tie you to a horse and take you to those agents myself. I will protect my daughter." The threat hung in the air, brutal and absolute. This was not the civilized world of contracts and lawyers. This was the wilderness. His word was law in this cabin. Tears streamed down her face. She finally broke. My late husband was Marcus Fairchild," she began, her voice cracking. "He was old and very, very rich. When he died 6 months ago, he left me everything. His shipping line, his properties, all of it." "A rich widow," Jonah sneered. "So you ran off with the money?" "No," she cried. "His brother, Silas Fairchild, contested the will. He said I'd tricked Marcus, but it wasn't true. Marcus, he didn't trust Silas. He knew his brother was ruthless." She fumbled for her valise, which she'd hidden under the cot. She clicked it open and pulled out the leather-bound ledger. "Marcus gave me this 2 days before he died. He told me to hide it. It's his private ledger. It proves Silas has been embezzling from the company for years. Millions. He wasn't just trying to contest the will, Jonah. He was trying to hide his crimes. If this ledger is produced in court, he'll go to prison." Jonah's anger began to curdle into a grim understanding. "So he's not trying to get his money back. He's trying to bury the evidence." "And me," she whispered. "I'm the only one who can testify to its authenticity. I fled New York. I thought if I could get to my husband's lawyers in San Francisco, I'd be safe. I'd be protected. I paid the driver to take the old trails to avoid Pinkertons on the main line." "Those men who ambushed you," Jonah said, the pieces clicking. "They weren't trying to rob you. They were trying to kill you." "Yes," she sobbed, "and they will. Silas will not stop. He will hire men like your Mr. Hogan, and he will burn this whole valley to the ground to find that book and to silence me." Jonah stared at the ledger in her hands. That simple book was a death warrant. "You should have told me," he said, his voice quiet now, but more terrifying for it. "I was afraid. What could I say? I'm a fugitive. Please help me." "You could have trusted me," he said. "Instead, you made me a blind accomplice." He turned away from her, running a hand through his hair. He walked to the cabin's single window, peering out at the ridgeline. "You have to leave," he said. Eliza's heart stopped. "What?" "I'll give you a horse. I'll give you food and water. You ride north. You might make it to the Union Pacific line in Cheyenne." "You can't," she pleaded. "Jonah, please. They'll find me before I've gone 5 miles. You saw those men. And this Hogan." "That's not my concern," he said, his voice flat. "My concern is Sarah. I won't have a war fought on my doorstep." Then take me to them," she whispered, her voice hollow. "Take me to the agents. At least they said they wanted me safe." "You think they'll take you alive, knowing what you carry?" Jonah scoffed. "They'll put a bullet in you, and that Hogan will help them bury the body. And then, just to be sure, they'll come back here and silence me and my daughter for good, for being witnesses." He had paced them into a corner. There was no escape. By finding her, he was already implicated. Eliza sank onto the bench, her body shaking. He was right. She had doomed him just by being found. From behind the curtain, a small sob was heard. Sarah poked her head out, her face streaked with tears. She had heard everything. She ran, not to her father, but to Eliza. She wrapped her small arms around Eliza's waist, burying her face in the torn silk. "Don't let them take her, Papa," Sarah cried. "Don't let the bad men take Mrs. Eliza." Jonah stared at his daughter, clinging to the woman who had, hours before, been a terrifying stranger. In the last 2 days, Eliza had mended Sarah's clothes, had brushed her hair, had talked to her in a soft voice that wasn't his. He had seen it, but hadn't acknowledged it. Eliza's arms came up, holding the child protectively. She looked up at Jonah, her eyes filled with a desperate, primal plea. It was no longer a rich woman asking for help. It was a woman protecting a child. His child. Jonah Wells looked at the two of them. The choice was gone. It had been made for him the moment he'd offered her his hand. He was trapped. Protecting his daughter now meant protecting Eliza. He let out a long, ragged breath. The fight was coming. "All right," he said. His voice was grim. "You stay. But you're not a guest anymore, Mrs. Fairchild." He walked to the wall and pulled down his second rifle, an older, heavier Springfield. He tossed it to her. She barely caught it. "You want to live?" Jonah said, grabbing the boxes of ammunition. "You'll learn to fight. Hogan and his men will be here by morning. Maybe sooner." Eliza looked at the heavy rifle, then at Jonah, then at the child clinging to her. The terror was still there, but something new was rising with it. A cold, hard resolve. "Show me what to do," Eliza Fairchild said. The sun rose red, painting the prairie in colors of rust and blood. Jonah hadn't let Eliza or Sarah sleep. He'd worked with a frantic, focused energy. "They'll come from the east, from the ridge. It's the high ground," he'd explained, his voice low and quick. "They'll try to pin us in the cabin." He'd made Eliza drag 2 heavy oak barrels to the windows, filling them with water. For fire. He'd boarded up the back window entirely, leaving only a small slit to shoot through. The front window and the door were the main lines of fire. "This is a Springfield," he'd said, forcing the rifle into Eliza's hands. "It's not like your little Derringer. It kicks like a mule. You put the stock here, tight against your shoulder. You don't aim at them. You aim for the center of their chest. You pull the trigger. You don't squeeze it. And you don't stop to think. You just reload." He'd made her load and dry fire it 20 times, his rough hands correcting her grip, his voice impatient. Again. Faster. Your life is in that second between shots. He'd given Sarah her job. She was the reloader. He laid out the boxes of 44 Winchester rounds and the 50 caliber Springfield rounds. You stay behind the fireplace. You hand us the bullets. You don't cry. You don't make a sound. You understand me, Sarah?" The girl, pale but resolute, nodded. "Yes, Papa." Eliza watched them. This terrible, efficient ritual. This was their life. Survival. She felt a wave of shame for the life she had led, where her greatest crisis was which dress to wear to a ball. As dawn broke, Jonah, who had been watching from the front window, went still. "They're here," he whispered. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. She moved to the second window, her hands slick with sweat on the wooden stock of the rifle. She saw them. 4 riders on the ridge, black silhouettes against the red sky. They weren't the city agents. This was Dutch Hogan and 3 of his local thugs. They fanned out, dismounting and taking cover in the rocks and scrub, just out of effective rifle range. Then, a 5th rider appeared. He trotted his horse forward brazenly, a dirty white flag tied to a stick. It was Dutch. He was a big, beefy man with a red beard and a wide-brimmed hat. He stopped 100 yards from the cabin. "Wells!" Hogan's voice boomed across the clearing. "Jonah Wells! I know you're in there, and I know who you're hiding." Jonah stepped onto the porch, his Winchester held casually at his side. "Morning, Dutch. You're trespassing." "Don't give me that," Hogan laughed, a nasty sound. "I had a chat with some fellas in town. They're looking for a piece of runaway property, a very expensive piece. Seems she stumbled right into your lap." "I don't know what you're talking about," Jonah said, his voice level. "Don't lie to me, Wells. I know you found that wreck. Now, here's the deal. You send out the woman, and I'll forget I ever saw her here. I'll even give you a cut of the reward. $500. Gold." "She's not here, Dutch." Hogan's smile vanished. "500 is my friendly offer. My other offer is I burn this place to the ground, kill you, take your girl, and then take the woman anyway. I don't care which. But I'm not leaving without her." Jonah raised his rifle. "You've got 10 seconds to get off my land, Dutch, or I'll start counting in bullets." Hogan's eyes narrowed. "Wrong choice, Jonah." He wheeled his horse around and galloped back to his men. Jonah stepped back inside and barred the door. "Get to the window, Eliza. He'll send 1 or 2 men to test us. Don't fire until I do." The silence stretched. It was worse than the shouting. Eliza's breath was a roaring in her ears. Crack! A bullet splintered the window frame inches from Eliza's face. She screamed and dropped to the floor. "I said stay on the rifle," Jonah roared. "He's got you pinned! Get up! Get up, or you'll get us all killed!" Shaking, Eliza crawled back to the window. "There," Jonah said, pointing. "The rocks to the left. You see him?" Eliza peered out. She saw a puff of smoke. Crack! Another shot, this one thudding into the log wall. "He's reloading," Jonah said. "Fire now, Eliza. Center mass." Eliza raised the heavy rifle, rested it on the barrel. She saw a flash of a blue shirt. She closed her eyes and pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening. The rifle bucked back, slamming into her shoulder with such force it knocked her off the bench. The pain was excruciating. "Ah, God!" she cried, clutching her shoulder. "Did you hit him?" Jonah yelled, firing his own rifle at another target. "I don't know. I think my shoulder is broken." "It's not broken," he yelled, shoving a new cartridge into his Winchester. "It's bruised. Now get back on the gun." This was the rhythm. A shot, a zinging sound as a bullet hit the cabin. The smell of sulfur and gunpowder filled the small room. Sarah, white as a sheet, wordlessly handed bullets to her father. For an hour, they were pinned. Then, the shooting stopped. "What's happening?" Eliza whispered, her shoulder a throbbing agony. "They're moving," Jonah said, his eyes scanning. "They're trying something else. They know they can't take the cabin from the front. "Papa," Sarah whispered, pointing to the back wall. "I smell smoke." Jonah's head snapped around. He ran to the back wall, sniffing at the boarded-up window. "The barn! Damn him!" He unbarred the door and ran out the back. Dutch, under cover of the rifle fire, had sent a man to circle around and set the barn ablaze. The dry hay had caught instantly. Flames were already licking up the side of the structure. "The horses!" Jonah yelled. He sprinted for the barn. "It's a trap!" Eliza screamed from the doorway. She was right. As soon as Jonah cleared the cabin, 2 of Hogan's men stood up from the rocks and opened fire. Bullets kicked up dirt around Jonah's feet as he dove for the corral. He was pinned. "Eliza, cover me!" he yelled. Hogan himself rose from behind a large boulder, taking careful aim at Jonah. Eliza saw him. Hogan, the man who had threatened to kill them all. She ran back to the front window, her shoulder screaming. She jammed the rifle through. Hogan was a large, clear target. Tight to the shoulder. "Center mass. Don't think." She fired. The recoil still hurt, but she was ready for it. She didn't hit him, but the bullet whined off the rock next to his head, close enough to make him duck, cursing. The distraction was all Jonah needed. He lunged for the barn door, ripped it open, and slapped the rumps of the 2 panicked horses, sending them galloping out onto the plain. But the fire was too hot. He couldn't get to the cow. He ran back to the cabin, bullets snapping at his heels, and tumbled inside, barring the door just as a bullet buried itself in the wood. He was coughing, his face black with soot. The barn's lost. Horses are gone. He slumped against the wall, breathing heavily. "You're hit!" Eliza cried. A dark red stain was spreading across his sleeve. A bullet had grazed his forearm. "It's nothing," he grunted. But his face was pale. Eliza ripped a strip of cloth from her expensive silk petticoat. "Sarah, get the whiskey," she ordered. She poured the alcohol onto the wound. Jonah hissed, his whole body tensing, but he didn't cry out. Eliza tied the bandage, her hands surprisingly steady. The stitches she'd put on his shirt were clumsy, but this knot was tight and professional. He looked at her. Her face was smeared with gunpowder, her hair was falling out of its pins, and her silk dress was now stained with his blood. She was terrified, but she was still there. She hadn't hidden. She'd fired. "You did good," Jonah panted. "You saved my life." The respect in his eyes hit her harder than the rifle's kick. Outside, Hogan was roaring. "That was your last chance, Wells. We'll roast you in there." But the dynamic had changed. The barn was gone. Hogan had lost the element of surprise, and his men had seen Eliza Fairchild shoot. "They'll wait until dark," Jonah whispered. "They'll try to burn the cabin." "What do we do?" Eliza asked. "We wait," Jonah said, reloading his Winchester, his wounded arm stiff. "We wait. And we don't miss." They sat in the smoky, hot cabin, the 3 of them, a broken, strange family, waiting for the night to fall. The sunset. The heat of the day bled away, replaced by a high desert cold. The smouldering ruins of the barn cast a faint, dying glow. Inside the cabin, it was tomb dark. "They're moving," Jonah whispered. He was at the front window. Eliza was at the back slit, her rifle pointing into the blackness. "I can't see anything," she whispered back. "You'll hear them first. A rock skittering, a boot scraping on wood. Don't fire at a sound. Wait until you have a shadow." Eliza's entire body was one taut nerve. The cabin, which had seemed so small and cramped, now felt like a vast, dark, undefendable space. Then, a new sound. Not a boot scrape. Hoofbeats, many of them. And a voice. "Hogan, you inbred arsonist! Hold your fire!" Jonah and Eliza looked at each other in the gloom. "Who is that?" Eliza breathed. "Sheriff Brody," Jonah said. His voice was not relieved. It was tight. Hogan wouldn't call the law. Jonah moved to the door. Sheriff? That you? It's me, Wells, came the reply. And I've got a whole lot of questions. Come on out, and bring the woman. Jonah looked at Eliza. This is bad. Brody is a political animal. He follows the money. The money, Eliza repeated. A cold, terrible idea began to form. The agents, they're with him. Stay here, Jonah commanded. He unbarred the door and stepped onto the porch, his hands in the air, his rifle left inside. In the faint moonlight, Eliza could see them. A posse of 6 men. Sheriff Brody, a portly man with a silver star, the 2 city agents from the saloon, Mr. Thorne and his partner, and standing next to them, a tall, impeccably dressed man in a dark suit, his face pale and furious. Eliza gasped. She would know that face anywhere. Silas, she breathed. It was her brother-in-law, Silas Fairchild. He hadn't just sent agents. He had come himself. Jonah Wells, Silas Fairchild said, his voice cutting and precise, dripping with East Coast superiority. You have been harboring my fugitive sister-in-law. She is unstable, a thief. Sheriff, arrest this man for kidnapping and abetting a criminal. Kidnapping, Jonah spat. She was running for her life. Your men ambushed her. My men, Silas said with a cold smile. I have no men. I have agents of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, hired to retrieve my stolen property. You, sir, are a common ruffian. Sheriff Brody stepped forward. Wells, you're in a heap of trouble. We found the wreck. We saw Hogan's men. Now, you give us the woman, and I'll see about. No, Eliza said. She stepped out of the cabin door, her silk dress glowing faintly in the moonlight. She was holding the Springfield rifle in one hand and the leather ledger in the other. Silas's eyes locked onto the ledger. His mask of calm cracked. That was what he was here for. Eliza, my dear, he said, his voice turning syrupy. Thank God you're safe. These savages, what have they done to you? Come here. It's all over. He took a step toward her. Stop right there, Silas, Eliza said. Her voice didn't shake. It was as cold and hard as the rifle barrel. Give me the rifle, ma'am, Sheriff Brody said, his hand moving to his gun. This is official. Sheriff, Eliza interrupted, do you know what this is? She held up the ledger. This is my late husband's business ledger, the real one, and it details on page 48 how Silas Fairchild here embezzled over $2 million from his own brother. Silas went rigid. The Pinkertons, Thorne and his partner, looked at each other. This was not what they were hired for. They were hired to retrieve a hysterical woman, not be party to a felony. She's lying, Silas hissed. She's mad, I told you. Am I? Eliza said, her voice rising. It also details, Sheriff, a contingency fund of $50,000 wired to a bank in Cheyenne 2 weeks ago. The same bank, I imagine, that holds the mortgage on your ranch, Sheriff. Brody froze. His hand dropped from his gun. Jonah stared at Eliza. He had no idea if she was bluffing about the sheriff, but it was a master stroke. And you, Eliza said, turning to Dutch Hogan, who was still hiding in the rocks. Did he pay you yet, Mr. Hogan? Or did he just promise you a cut? He'll kill you, just like he tried to kill me. He can't leave witnesses. Hogan's head popped up. What? He said he was paying. The entire scene had fractured. The power had shifted from the men with guns to the woman with the book. Silas saw it. He saw his world, his freedom, his fortune, all dissolving. He was a cornered rat. He lunged, not at Eliza, but at Sheriff Brody. He snatched the sheriff's revolver from its holster. "The book, Eliza!" he screamed, his face a mask of rage. He leveled the gun at her. "Give me the book, or I'll kill you myself." He was 10 feet from her. Jonah, who had been standing with his hands up, moved. He dove, shoulder-checking Silas with all his weight. The two men crashed to the ground. The gun flew from Silas's hand. Dutch Hogan, seeing his payday, his bribe, and his life all evaporating, rose from the rocks. He wasn't aiming at Silas. He was aiming at Jonah, the man who had caused all this. He raised his rifle. Bang! A single shot. It wasn't Jonah's gun. It wasn't Silas's. Dutch Hogan staggered. He looked down at the red flower blooming on his chest, then collapsed. Everyone stared. Sheriff Brody stood over Hogan's body, his own smoking pistol in his hand. He looked at the Pinkertons. He looked at Silas, who was now pinned under Jonah. He looked at Eliza. Brody, the political animal, had seen the only way out. He'd chosen a side. He was trying to shoot an unarmed woman, Sheriff Brody announced to the stunned silence. I had no choice. It was self-defense. He holstered his pistol. Mr. Thorne, the Pinkerton, nodded slowly. That's exactly what we saw, Sheriff. Silas Fairchild began to laugh, a high, hysterical sound. It was over. Brody pulled Silas to his feet and slammed manacles on his wrists. Silas Fairchild, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of Mrs. Fairchild. And for embezzlement, Eliza said, walking forward. She handed the ledger not to the agents but to Jonah. Hold this for me. As evidence. Jonah took the book. He looked at Eliza, her face illuminated by the moon, smeared with grime and gunpowder. She was the most beautiful, terrifying thing he had ever seen. The siege was over. A week passed. The rhythm of the ranch returned, but it was a new rhythm. The burned-out shell of the barn was a grim reminder, but Jonah had already started salvaging the unscorched timbers. The two Pinkerton agents, Mr. Thorne and his partner, had stayed, quartered in the new, empty hayloft. They were under new orders, not from Silas, but from the Fairchild lawyers in San Francisco. Protect Mrs. Fairchild at all costs. Silas Fairchild and Sheriff Brody were gone, taken by federal marshals to Cheyenne. The wire from New York confirmed everything in the ledger. Silas was being extradited, and Brody was ruined. Eliza Fairchild was, once again, one of the richest women in America. But she didn't look it. She sat on the porch step, wearing one of Hannah Wells's old calico dresses. Her own silk finery had been ruined, used for bandages and cleaning rags. Her hands, which Jonah had once noted were soft, were now blistered and raw. She had been helping Jonah clear the debris, hauling wood until her arms shook. She was teaching Sarah to read. Every afternoon, they sat on the porch with the family Bible, Eliza's soft voice patiently sounding out the words, Sarah's small finger tracing the letters. Jonah would stop his work and watch them. He felt a strange ache in his chest. The cabin was no longer quiet. It was filled with the sound of their voices, the smell of the perfume he'd salvaged from her valise, the sight of her mending his shirts. Her stitches were still messy, but they were strong. On the 8th day, a smart black carriage, not unlike the one that had been destroyed, rolled up the trail. A man in a clean, dark suit stepped out. He was not a gunslinger. He was a lawyer. Mrs. Fairchild? He asked, looking in confusion at the woman in the faded dress. I am Eliza Fairchild, she said, standing. Ma'am, my name is Arthur Gable, with the firm of Hemsley and Gable, out of Cheyenne. We've been in contact with your legal team in San Francisco. The situation with Mr. Silas Fairchild is resolved. The U.S. Marshals have him. Your estate is secure. Thank you, Mr. Gable. We have your private train car secured in Cheyenne. It can take you to San Francisco or back to New York, whichever you prefer. Your trunks, or new ones, have been arranged. You are free to leave this place whenever you wish. This was it. The moment of her freedom. The path back to her old life. Jonah had stopped working. He stood by the half-built new barn wall, his hammer in his hand. He was pointedly not looking at her, his jaw set. He was giving her the dignity of the choice, but the tension in his shoulders was palpable. Eliza looked at the lawyer, at his clean carriage, and his promise of comfort. She looked at the gashed, raw land, the half-built barn, and the tiny cabin. She looked at Sarah, who was peering around the doorframe, her eyes wide with fear. "Mr. Gable," Eliza said, her voice clear, "please send a wire to my attorneys in New York. Tell them to liquidate half of my shares in the shipping line. I want the funds transferred to the bank in Cheyenne." The lawyer blinked. "Ma'am, why?" "And send another wire to the general store in Red Creek," Eliza continued. "I want to order lumber, a great deal of it, and glass for 2 new windows, and a stud bull, a Hereford, I think, and 2 new dresses for my daughter, and a new coat for Mr. Wells." The lawyer was utterly lost. "Mrs. Fairchild, I don't understand." Eliza turned to Jonah. He was staring at her now, his hammer forgotten. "You can't build a proper barn with salvaged wood, Jonah," she said softly. "It won't last the winter, and you can't run a ranch this size by yourself." "Mrs. Fairchild," Jonah said, his voice rough. "Eliza, I can't pay you." "I'm not looking for pay," she said. She walked over to him, stopping just inches from him. She could smell the sawdust and sweat on him. "I'm looking for a partner, but I have a condition." "What's that?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "You have to stop calling me Mrs. Fairchild. My name is Eliza." Jonah searched her face. He saw no trace of the hysterical, lost woman he'd found by the wreck. He saw the woman who had fired a rifle to save him, who had faced down a killer with a book, and who had just ordered a Hereford bull like she was ordering a hat. A slow smile spread across his face. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile, and it transformed his harsh features. "A partner," he repeated. "I suppose I can't let my new investor stand around all day. There's wood to be stacked." He didn't lean in to kiss her. He didn't touch her. He just held out his hand, his calloused, rough hand. Eliza looked at it. She placed her own hand, no longer soft, but blistered and capable, into his. They shook. It wasn't a handshake. It was a contract. It was a promise. "Papa!" Sarah yelled, running from the porch. She launched herself at them, wrapping her arms around both their legs. Jonah reached down with his free hand and lifted his daughter, settling her on his hip. His other hand was still holding Eliza's. The lawyer, Mr. Gable, simply sighed, defeated by a kind of transaction he had never studied in law school. He tipped his hat. I'll go send those wires, ma'am." He climbed back into his carriage and rode away, leaving the 3 of them standing by the new foundation. Jonah, Eliza, and Sarah. They stood together, looking out at the vast, harsh, beautiful land. The lost widow was gone. The single father was no longer alone. They weren't lost. They were home. And that's how the lost widow found her home. Not in a New York mansion, but in a Wyoming cabin with a man who had nothing and a child who gave her everything. The Wild West wasn't just won by cowboys and soldiers. It was built by people with grit, by survivors like Jonah, and by women like Eliza, who found a strength they never knew they had. These stories of the frontier are more than just history. They're about the heart that forged a nation. If you were moved by Jonah and Eliza's stand, please, show your support. Hit that like button so we know you want more tales like this. Share this video with someone who loves a powerful drama. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel. We have so many more stories to tell, and we don't want you to miss a single one. Thanks for listening. For